Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the housing of asylum seekers at Cameron Barracks in Inverness.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
I was deeply disappointed to learn about the Home Office plans to accommodate people seeking asylum in Cameron Barracks in Inverness from the media yesterday, rather than through, at the very least, a formal notification, or, as it should be, as part of a collaborative discussion before any decision had been made. On hearing that these Scottish Government officials had been notified that the Home Office was considering Cameron Barracks, I wrote to the Home Secretary in September seeking an urgent meeting. I've been clear with the Home Office that these plans must fully consider the impact on the local community and the appropriateness of the site to accommodate this group of people. I understand the meeting is in the process of being scheduled.
Edward Mountain.
Well, I'm a little bit confused there, Cabinet Secretary, because Alex Norris stood up in the House of Commons at 2 o'clock today to answer an urgent question. And he said, my officials have been engaging directly and regularly in advance of this with the Scottish Government, relevant councils and local service providers, and will continue to do so. That doesn't quite chime with what the Cabinet Secretary said, Presiding Officer. My constituents are rightly concerned about their safety, not on the streets, but their health safety. There is just not enough resources in the Highlands. Inverness GPs are creaking at the seams. Regmore is unable to keep up with appointments, and there aren't enough dentists to go round. So what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give me that the people in the Highlands will continue to be able to get some level of health cover with the extra 300 people that will be moving into Cameron Barracks?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm happy to give further detail in writing about the timeline on this with Edward Mountain, because I think it's important that we do deal with the issues that his constituents have raised. But I'd say once again that when we had word that it was being considered, then I raised concerns in a letter to the Home Secretary, and those concerns have not been answered. Now, if that's what the UK Government considers as a collaborative piece of working, we will just have to agree to disagree on that point. And I do hope that I'll be able to meet with the relevant UK Minister in due course, because I have written again today to raise a number of concerns with the Home Secretary. I would say at the outset that Scotland does welcome refugees, and we do welcome asylum seekers, and it's important that we have our moral and our international responsibilities at the forefront of our minds as we look to do so. But that's exactly why these decisions should be taken in collaboration between UK Government, Scottish Government, local authorities and local service providers, because I can understand why, given the way that this was announced, there are concerns about the provision on health services and there are concerns around other local services. So that's exactly why I've written to the Home Secretary to ask specifically to ensure that there is reassurance around full wraparound services that will be provided on site, and in a way that there is capacity on site to be able to deal with the health or other requirements of those who may be moving. And if we have that at the forefront of our mind about how can we support asylum seekers and deliver local services, I would like to do that too. But I can only do that if the UK Government works with the Scottish Government and local government to be able to do just that.
Edward Mountain.
So it sounds like the Cabinet Secretary has been in negotiation with the UK Government for some time, and let's
hear one another.
It was deeply concerning for constituents across the Highlands to only find out about this on Monday. By what the Cabinet Secretary has just said, this issue was raised back in September. It may have been that it was done before, and that clearly Alex Norris believes that it's been done well in advance of that, and that's the evidence he gave to the House of Commons. So, Cabinet Secretary, surely the point now is that it's up to the UK Government to start speaking to elected representatives, the Highland Council and service providers to make sure that we have the services in the Highlands. And I would just reiterate, Cabinet Secretary, Highlanders have always opened our doors to people to allow them to come up. We've welcomed Afghan people to come and stay who'd worked with the British Army to Cameron Barracks. This is a different ballgame. This is 300 young men moving to Inverness, and we don't know what their requirements are, we don't know what the services are, and Highlanders aren't even getting the services themselves when it comes to housing.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, again, we're going to have to agree to disagree on whether this is a negotiation or not. I've laid out the concerns that I have raised on behalf of the Scottish Government with the UK Government, because I actually think if we get to some attempt at an agreement here with the member, some of the points that he is raising, Presiding Officer, are exactly the points that I have been raising and not getting answers to from the UK Government. And that's why it was a concern. So, for example, on Monday, when the UK Government eventually informed Highland Council that Scottish Government, despite being asked if we could attend that meeting, were not able to attend that meeting because we weren't told about it. Now, again, there is a degree of frustration from ministers on how we can attempt to work together to be able to reassure people. But what I would say to Mr Mountain is the Scottish Government is working as close as we possibly can with local service providers and Highland Council, and my officials have met with Highland Council regularly, and I've reached out to meet with Highland Council leaders as well, because he does point out to where there has been very successful welcoming cohorts within Inverness. Actually, that is an example of where the UK Government and Scottish Government work together to ensure that the planning for the Afghan cohort in the very same barracks was successful, because we did so collaboratively. If we can do it once, we can do it again, but it requires the willingness of the UK Government. And I think Mr Mountain is again saying that this is a different cohort. They are right, Presiding Officer, but they are those people who are seeking asylum, and we have an obligation to ensure that we support those people, and we do so in a way where local communities can be reassured about the services that they also require.
Thank you. There is a great deal of interest in this item. I'm keen to enable as many members as possible to take part, so succinct questions and responses appreciated. I call Emma Roddick to be followed by Michael Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will share my frustration that elected members of all levels were only made aware of the decision to use Cameron Barracks as asylum accommodation through the media yesterday morning. A clear example of the disastrous management underway at the Home Office as they battle to outdo far-right parties with failing policies. Inverness politicians have been receiving confused correspondence from constituents over the last day as the UK Government seems to be going out of its way to contribute to the hostile environment that it inherited from the Tories. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore advise what engagement she's had and anticipates having with the evidently chaotic Home Office?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would agree with the member that proper engagement is critical for all levels of government in this. So, following my initial letter on the 26th of September, I've written to the Home Secretary again today to flag up the concerns that remain, and that we are very, very keen to be able to work with them on this process. The member is also quite right to point out to the fact, as she has done on numerous occasions, that Scotland and indeed the Highlands has a long history of welcoming refugees and of welcoming asylum seekers. So if you were going to start to implement a policy which delivered for local communities and asylum seekers and which ensured community cohesion, you would not go about it in this way. And that is exactly why there is an intense level of frustration within the Scottish Government. But in saying that, we now stand ready to work collaboratively with the UK Government should they now wish to do so.
Michael Mara to be followed by Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm full agreement in terms of the need for joint working across the UK on these issues. But let's be clear, the UK Government inherited a policy disaster from the Tories who broke the asylum system. Under Labour, there are double the number of asylum decisions, removals have increased by 30%, and the number of asylum hotels are down by close to 50% from its peak under the Tories. It's going in the right direction, and we want to see that increased. The use of military barracks as a temporary measure is is a practical step that will deliver better value for the public. Mr Swinney and his Cabinet Minister certainly talk the language of supporting asylum seekers, but when the SNP-run Glasgow City Council wanted to pause refugees coming to Glasgow, the First Minister did back them to the hilt. And now when the Home Office proposes army barracks as an alternative to housing asylum seekers in hotels, the SNP appear to be equivocating on some of the issues. So can I ask, in terms of beyond engagement...
Let's hear one another.
Presiding Officer, if I can ask, beyond engagement, what actions will the Cabinet Secretary stand ready to provide to ensure this works?
Cabinet Secretary.
With the greatest respect to Michael Mara, and I have to give him some kudos for attempting to deflect as much as he had in that. But you can't blame the Conservative government for the way that the current UK government handled the announcement yesterday. That's got nothing to do with the Tories. There's lots we can blame the Tories on, but let's accept the responsibility of where it is. And we do, within the Scottish Government, recognise that there's a need to provide safe, supported accommodation for people seeking asylum. Of course there is. And we agree that the long-term use of hotel accommodation is not suitable and that alternatives must be sought. All we're asking for is that you consider the cohort, you work out what services that cohort requires, and then you work with local government, with the Scottish Government and with local services providers to find the best place to accommodate those people. You don't find somewhere to put people and then try and shoehorn everything else in after the decision has been made. So, Presiding Officer, we are all wanting to work with the UK Government, but what it requires is for the UK Government to actually say what they will deliver actually on site, and then we will know the pressures which Mr Mountain raised that people are concerned about. That's how you collaborate to actually implement a cohesive policy.
Fergus Ewing, to be followed by Douglas Ross.
Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that we need to have a rational, calm discussion about these matters, that people have genuine concerns, but that does not mean that those concerns are born at all out of racism, but rather because of various practical matters that must be considered rationally and thoroughly? Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it would have been better had there been a prior discussion, negotiation between the two governments about what locations are suitable and unsuitable? And does she understand that in Inverness there's a very strong view that the central location beside a residential development and the school are not the right location? Will she publish the letter that she shared with the UK Government? And following a briefing I had with the Home Office this morning, does she, as I believe, suggest that Mr Norris, the Minister in the UK Government, should visit Inverness, should come and explain to people there and be open to question from the press about what is going to happen and when, not least because the barracks are extremely cold and unfit for human occupation at the current time, something that the Home Office admitted this morning, yet said it would be all ready in a couple of weeks' time. I'll believe that when I see it. So I want to work with the Cabinet Secretary. I would like to see the two governments working together, but having above all a rational, open discussion so that we are not getting involved in charges of racism here we all want to avoid.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think Mr Ewing's suggestion that a UK Minister visits Inverness is a very sensible one. It's perhaps something that should have been done before the decision was made, I would suggest. But it's very important that people from local communities have an ability to be able to have their voice heard on that. I'm sure local representatives will do that both at council level and within the Scottish Parliament, but the UK ministers have a responsibility too. We are here as representatives to represent our communities, and of course there are a number of concerns that local residents have had. I do believe that many of those concerns are based on a concern about the ability of local service provision, but that's exactly why I have written to the Home Secretary twice now to lay out specific concerns. I'm certainly more than happy to make those to make those letters available, because what we do have to ensure is that we're here to represent communities, but we also, where at all possible, are here to reassure our communities that asylum seekers can be part of our community. They are indeed actually part of our communities in many parts of Scotland, and both the people who live here currently and who may move here in the future can work together and can live together very well if practical matters are dealt with.
Thank you. We have much interest. I'd be grateful for concise questions and responses. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. People in Inverness and the Highlands are concerned about this, and part of that is the way it was announced, but a large part of it, is what Fergus Ewing and Edward Mountain have discussed, is about the availability of services, which are already stretched and are going to be put under more pressure. So if the Cabinet Secretary has accepted to Parliament today that she has been discussing this with the Home Office since September, can she outline what discussions the Scottish... The Cabinet Secretary wrote to the Home Office about this proposal in September. She's going to publish that letter. So can I ask what discussions the Scottish Government have been having since September about education, justice, local government and health, which would be impacted by 300 individuals coming up to Inverness? And also, does the Cabinet Secretary believe any planning permissions are required at Cameron Barracks to house these additional individuals? Because, as Fergus Ewing said, that is not going to be sorted in a matter of weeks. That will take months.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the issue of planning, Presiding Officer, is of course one for Highland Council to consider as the people who would, as the authority who would make any planning decisions on that basis. So I will leave that to Highland Council to discuss. Again, I'm loath to get caught up in the semantics of this, but if sending a letter and not getting a reply is the member's idea of a discussion, again, we're just going to have to agree to disagree on these issues. But I have raised out concerns on this because it is very important that we recognise that there will be an anticipated high level of support for those who may be arriving in Inverness in reasonably short periods of time. And what we need to be able to reassure ourselves about, both I think within this Parliament and I'm sure within Highland Council and other local service providers, is what is the Home Office going to deliver on site, and to ensure that that delivery is actually on site and is available for the local, for people within that site, and what financial support will be made available to cover any increased costs that will fall on local public services as a result of the decision that is not being delivered on site. So until we get some more information from the Home Office on those 2 points, those are exactly the points I will continue to raise with them.
Ariane Burgess, to be followed by Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Forcing people who have fled war, persecution and violence into isolated institutional accommodation will do nothing to improve housing or community relations, but will do everything to help private companies line their pockets with more cash. Will the Cabinet Secretary give assurance that she will advocate for a migration and asylum policy that reflects Scotland's values of compassion and dignity, and seek devolved powers to manage asylum accommodation in a way that respects both local communities and the rights of displaced people?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can reassure the member that when I met with the previous Home Secretary not long after she came into office, I made exactly the points about the need for a different approach to asylum and a different approach to migration. Unfortunately, the calls from the Scottish Government have been rebuffed on this. But those points were again reiterated in the letter that I sent on the 26th of September, which to the new Home Secretary, to not only talk about the issues around Cameron Barracks, but to set out the principled stance that the Scottish Government does have on asylum and migration. I think it is very important that as we discuss this, and we rightly discuss the concerns of local people and local services, we also remind ourselves that we are talking about people who are fleeing war and persecution and unimaginable horror from different parts of this world, and we can never forget our moral and international legal obligations on these issues.
And Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the lack of notice to or involvement of elected representatives at all levels in Inverness is unforgivable. Had they been consulted, they would have told the UK Government that it is simply moving asylum seekers from one kind of unsuitable and costly accommodation to another. Presiding Officer, compassion must guide our approach, but so too must common sense. Inverness is a welcoming town, but the centrality of these barracks will give rise to the same concerns, particularly about impact on local services, which is leading the government to end the use of asylum hotels in the first place. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that alternative space must be found and that with urgency the UK Government should recruit 2,000 new casework officers to clear down these asylum claims?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think the way that Mr Cole-Hamilton has given a context to this is an important one, Presiding Officer. Compassion and common sense. I don't think is too much to ask for when it comes to a policy which is dealing with asylum seekers and dealing with people who are fleeing war and persecution. And there is a requirement for us to ensure that suitable accommodation is required. Now, that is a UK Government, a Home Office requirement, but there is within the Scottish Government, and I'm sure from councils right across Scotland, a willingness, and indeed we recognise our responsibilities to be able to work with the UK Government on this. They are responsible for accommodation for asylum seekers, but there are devolved services involved, and I once again point to the fact that where people have managed to come together, whether it's for the Afghan cohort, or whether it's been for Syrian refugees, or whether it's been for Ukrainians, there are demonstrations about how this can work, but it takes all levels of governments to do that. I'm disappointed by the way that the announcement on this has been handled, but there is now the opportunity for the UK Government to work with the Scottish Government and with others to be able to make the correct decisions as we go forward, both on the use of Cameron Barrett and on this policy in general.
Thank you.